Hi everyone and welcome to WhatCulture. That's right, it is the horrible nickname for this one-off podcast. I'm Kenny McIntosh. I'm joined here by the beautiful, voluptuous James Dixon.
Hello, Kenny.
Hello, and we are here to talk about UFC as part of MMA week here on WhatCulture. This weekend, UFC 200, this massive mega event in Las Vegas where Brock Lesnar returns to the octagon, and finally Cormier Jones, the rematch, the sequel, whatever you want to call it. Now, I think we need to make a little confession here before we go too far into this.
Go for it.
Oh, so I need to make.
I think you can admit it.
So. We don't know a lot about MMA, but we know more than anybody else in the office. So by default, we were put in here and told, just talk about it a bit, because it's MMA week, and we decided to come up with a concept. So can you do something about it? And we were like, okay, fine. So here we are. So obviously UFC 200 is coming up on Saturday night, and I guess first of all, before we're going to kind of talk about the card, just some of the main matches. When you heard that Brock was going back,
right
at the end of it was UFC 199, right, where they did the video.
Sure. Well, when Ariel Helwani told everyone first, but yeah,
that's not the official speak. we don't mention that. I don't want banned from future UFC events.
No, God forbid.
What was you? Because I found out when I was at Primavera, the music festival in Barcelona. Right. I woke up the next morning and everyone was just like, "Holy, you know what? Brock Lesnar's at UFC 200," and I immediately just thought, "Oh, he must be doing a special appearance because." Why would Brock Lesnar be back in the octagon?
It didn't make any sense. Sure.
How did you find out, and what was your initial thought? Because you do have some contacts in the wrestling industry, so it may have hit you differently than it hit me.
I mean, I heard pretty much at the same time as everyone else, but when it was broke originally by Helwani, not when UFC broke it. I knew before UFC broke it, but I think everyone did by then.
Yeah. If you were online that day, you knew.
Yeah, you did. And, you know, I was watching sort of the fallout from that, or listening to the fallout from that as well, and it was crazy. And, you know, a lot of... The thing is, the big story that weekend should have been Bisping winning the title.
Yeah, and it was kind of...
It was just ignored.
Absolutely afterthought.
Completely, yeah. And it's like, this is...
Poor guy.
It was such a huge upset as well, and, you know, nobody saw it coming. I mean, really high on the list of UFC upsets, I would personally say. Up there with Holly and Ronda, you know, up there with, you know, GSP, and I can't even remember who he fought because it was a long time ago, and, you know, our knowledge is patchy. Yeah. You know.
So, in my limited UFC fandom, which for anybody who doesn't know, I kind of watch maybe the top 3 fights on most big cards. That's kind of how my fandom goes. My biggest, the biggest upset I've ever seen in my time watching it is obviously Holly and Ronda. That to me was
that was huge though. I mean, Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman as well. I mean, that was a big one because, you know, the way it happened, you know, with Anderson messing around and Weidman caught him, and nobody thought Anderson could get beat really at that point. He was the greatest MMA fighter in some people's eyes. And then, you know, the whole rematch, and the rematch happened on the same card as the first big Ronda and Misha fight, and you know, that drew a lot of people in, I think, including me. That's kind of when I...
So when you found out about Brock...
But Brock, yeah.
Thoughts?
I mean...
Initial kind of thoughts?
I immediately figured that there must be something in it for WWE for them to agree to it, or that Brock's having one of his episodes. He had one pre-WrestleMania 20, quite famously, when he was like, I'm done. You know?
I remember being in New York the weekend of WrestleMania 20, and I was kind of... You know, I followed wrestling online and different things, but I didn't know as much as I'd say I maybe know now. And I remember everywhere it was kind of, you know, Goldberg's leaving, so Lesnar's going over, that's the plan, blah, 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 blah. And I think it was the Thursday of WrestleMania weekend. It hadn't even hit the full weekend. It was announced that Brock has given his notice.
It wasn't supposed to get out, and WWE were like, no, you know what, we're just going to leak it anyway to sort of disparage both guys. That was an intentional slight.
So then going in, you're like, okay, so both guys are leaving. Yeah. What are they going to do? And like, I remember being there. And I don't know if this picks up on TV when you watch it on the network, but there's one point during the match, the crowd really are not a fan of these guys because
they've both sold out.
It was such a big grudge match, you know. These guys
should have
sold
been.
But in the top tier, there was a guy dressed as Hulk Hogan and a guy dressed as Randy Savage, and they were basically doing the whole Mega Powers Explode angle in their section. And that is what people were interested in. Now, that was during a point in wrestling where the crowd weren't taking over the shows like they are now.
No, I mean, they had more at that time with like Rock and Brock 2 years earlier, SummerSlam, and it was starting to be a little bit, and Hogan and Rock, obviously. So it was a little bit more than it would have ever been in the 90s, but they still weren't like they are now, you know, where they'll just cheer literally whoever they want and boo anybody that WWE likes.
Pretty much.
You know, and it was wild. I mean, but like I say, that was just sudden, you know, it was like, you know what, I'm done. Off I go. And Lesnar gets like that. I'm doing football now. I'm doing MMA now. I'm going to wrestle in New Japan, even though I've got a non-compete contract, you know. And WWE like, well, you can't. And he's like, well, I'm just going to anyway. So he did, you know. And this is kind of Brock. It's like, I assume he's gone to them and gone, I'm going to do UFC 200. And they've gone, you're not. You know, well, I am, you know. So you can either like it or off I go.
Dave Meltzer says that he did have some sort of clause in his contract where there's an opening to do a match. I'm not quite sure how this works, but there must be somewhere
only Vince and Brock know for sure, I guess.
But something that struck me in the last couple of days that I thought was quite interesting was, so if you charter Brock's return run that he's had, he comes back in 2012.
Loses a couple of times to the poster boys.
Loses to Cena. Then he has that program that never ended with Triple H.
Which he lost at least once,
Which he lost once, on the event that people remember.
Naturally, of course.
Nobody remembers the perfect storm, but they remember the crap WrestleMania. So he has this Triple H program, and he somehow manages to get out the end of that relatively unscathed compared to what it would have done to anyone else. Like, nobody else could have recovered. Then he had the summer where he fought CM Punk at SummerSlam, had a great match. Then in 2014, he battered the Big Show at the Royal Rumble. And then he beat Taker. He ended the streak. Then he suplexed his way through John Cena to win the title.
Unbelievable.
We'll forget about the Night of Champions debacle.
I think we should.
He has an amazing triple threat match that saved the Royal Rumble in 2015 with Seth Rollins and John Cena.
I mean, it did come before the show needed saving, mind. But
in hindsight, I mean,
it saves
people might not go back and watch that if it wasn't for that match.
Probably the match of the year at WWE.
Yeah, he managed to help turn the Roman Reigns thing around at WrestleMania.
He had a hell of a match with Roman at WrestleMania. I mean, he did just beat him up.
But it worked. It helped Roman. People,
it did.
And then he had what I still think was an awesome kind of summer with the Undertaker last year.
The SummerSlam match was. I mean, the matches, both of them, the SummerSlam match and the
Hell in a Cell
were
was
both
really good.
superb. It was finishes were dodgy.
Here's where I think it's interesting. So he beats the Undertaker at Hell in a Cell, and then he leaves.
Yeah.
He comes back at the Royal Rumble, and he's eliminated by the Wyatts. He then is booked to not get any comeuppance on them that night.
Sure.
He then goes to WrestleMania and defeats Dean Ambrose in an exhibition match.
Has been seen since.
But the key thing is, with his 2016 appearances everything pre-2016, whether you enjoyed the Triple H shoot or not, everything kind of felt big. With Brock Lesnar.
Special. Yeah, it was.
Everything he's done this year has felt mid-card. The Rumble thing with the Wyatts didn't really click as people wanted it to. The Fastlane main event with Ambrose and Reigns, I think a lot of people...
Just to get Reigns there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people saw through it.
Oh, absolutely.
And then the exhibition match at WrestleMania. So I wouldn't be surprised if Brock Lesnar's kind of sitting, twiddling his thumbs, going, I've re-signed for 3 years, and they're not giving me anything good. They're not giving me... It strikes me that there can't just be a coincidence in the fact that when his run has got quite dry, he all of a sudden wants to do this other thing.
Maybe. There's two other factors, though. The first is that Brock Lesnar does not give a damn about things like that. You're turns
being nice
up,
about it.
I didn't want Sam to have to edit it out. He turns up, he gets paid, he leaves. He is not a guy who is motivated by titles, by being over, by wrestling dream opponents or anything like that. He is a guy who wants to be paid for doing things, paid well for it, and then sit on his farm for 3 months. His program with Dean Ambrose wasn't as good as it maybe could have been. Does Brock Lesnar care? I would be stunned if he did. I'd be stupefied if he cared, because he just doesn't. He's not that kind of self-mark almost. He doesn't care at all.
But I do think, because that's the image, right? That is the image that he doesn't care. And a lot of people would corroborate that.
There's a lot of truth to it as well.
But I don't believe that 100% he doesn't care. Like, I think he... Look at this year so far. Brock Lesnar is not as big an attraction as he was last year.
But he has been back for 4 years now.
He has, but I mean, I would argue that last year they were still great matches and big matches.
But last year he was the biggest star in the company. You know, coming out of WrestleMania, he was huge. He was ready to explode.
Yeah.
Big time, and then obviously he didn't wrestle again until the summer. But, you know, that's not really WWE's fault. That's just the nature of his contract and such. But,
I'm just putting out there, I think there's... I would be surprised if it did not enter his mind that he was a bit bored and UFC are offering this kind of huge thing to him.
Yeah, but the thing is, when he re-signed his contract with WWE, he was going back and forth. He did want to prove himself one more time in UFC because he, as a competitor, you know, because you got to think he was a real athlete, you know, and an amateur wrestler before he was a pro wrestler, and he has that competitive drive, and he wants to be the best at everything he does, which is, you know, why he's tried all these different things over the years, when he tried his football and everything else, just to see if that was something he'd missed out on. He wanted to make sure that he wasn't cut out to be a footballer. It turned out he wasn't, but, you know, and I think it's the same with MMA. Like he lost his last 2 fights. He blames his illness.
Diverticulitis.
Sure, and, you know, I'm sure that had a huge role to play in it, but he wants to know for sure. Like, it's like going back to an ex-girlfriend one last time. I guess, should I go with this again? Should I try this again? Or is it really just...
I'm not going to say anything.
Closing the curtains. My wife will be thrilled. You know, but that's kind of what I liken it to. He just wants to make sure that it really is, you know, it really is put to bed. And if he gets destroyed, he won't fight again. If he wins, I don't know. With it being Brock Lesnar, I think he might want to fight more if he beats Brock.
I think he will. But I just think that every wrestler has an ego.
Yeah.
To an extent.
Apart from Daniel Bryan.
Even then, I think there's a little bit somewhere. You have to have an ego somewhere to be able to do that job. And you know, it varies from tiny to huge.
Course.
But yeah, I just think when you look at Brock Lesnar's career, he was bored. He looked bored. He seemed bored. The programs were boring.
Maybe.
And now he's gone from being kind of like, oh, I wonder what they're going to do with Brock Lesnar to now who's the biggest star of the summer, Brock Lesnar.
But you can only accept enough at a fight again if UFC come to him with that fight. He can't really... I mean, I don't know what the situation is there as far as like contract tampering. Have WWE gone to UFC? Have UFC gone to WWE? Has Brock gone to them?
Well, the story is that Brock went to them.
Interesting.
Which I think makes more sense because they probably, if they negotiated with him and he went back to WWE, they probably didn't think they could get him again for a fight.
Sure. But I think then if that's the case, he's probably gone to Vince and said, look, I want to fight. And Vince has given him the clearance to go and talk. I don't think you've talked to Dana without permission from Vince. No. I don't think he would do that. And I don't think Dana would have talked to him without permission from Vince. You know, they would have needed written
And we'll talk about the fight and the UFC card in a minute, but it's funny because UFC fighters in WWE, it's not the first time it's happened. Like we had Ken Shamrock, who...
We had Vernon White.
We had Ken Shamrock, who came in 1997 in the New York Raw, where he turned up.
Yeah,
and
the ECW Raws.
Yeah, and then he was the referee at WrestleMania 13. Sure. And Shamrock was legit, like straight away. He had this great run.
He was billed in such a strange way as this sort of a crossover star, and
he looked like he was going to become WWF champion for a little while.
And I think he probably would have if it wasn't for politics, you know. And I've talked with Ken for a book in the past, and that's basically his opinion as well. That he sort of had a rocket strapped to him, and then sometimes it'd be injury, but oftentimes it'd be politics that get in the way. He also wasn't great on promos, which was a big factor in the Attitude Era.
And then they tried it again with Dan Severn, who came in 1998.
Yeah.
To varying degrees of success in the WWF run, but it was interesting because Severn was such a completely different type of, like Ken Shamrock to me, and I'm just saying as a wrestling fan because I hadn't followed them in MMA.
Okay.
Ken Shamrock was this explosive firecracker that could go off at any minute, blah blah blah. Dan Severn was this very mild-mannered,
deadly assassin.
Calculated. We got a picture of him here.
We do.
Mr. Severn. He was like a very calm, calculated guy that at any moment could just strike.
It's like a serial killer.
Yeah, he looks a little bit like a serial killer in that sense.
He's a bit... You know who he reminds me of as far as his persona? Not the real life guy, but...
Ted Bundy?
A little bit, but also the is it Richard Kolinsky who Steve Austin based his gimmick on?
Yeah.
You know, he reminds me a lot of that as well, and it's like Steve Austin's almost like a version of Dan Severn and vice versa. It's potentially people are going to find that one interesting. But yeah, I mean, the difference is like Shamrock came in with this big reputation and from UFC, but he also had this great fight record, which was really kayfabed from his time in UWFI, because they weren't shoots, they were work shoots, and so he had this inflated record, but WWE don't know the difference, or they didn't at the time. He did better Vader, Yeah, I talked to him about the match, and I said, like what happened? Like, did you just decide to stiff each other, or was it more like once you got in there, it just kind of happened? He's like, no, like that was the plan, that we'd go out there and really lay it in so people could see sort of what to expect from Shamrock and like what I can do. But I knew I couldn't do that every night against the likes of Shawn Michaels. Or whoever. If only. But he knew he couldn't do that, and that he had to. Because what people forget is that he was a wrestler before he was in MMA, so he could already wrestle. He was a worker first, and so was Dan Severn. That's what everyone forgets about Dan as well. That he was not only was he a great amateur wrestler, top level amateur wrestler. He would have gone to the Olympics if it wasn't for this one dodgy referee call that screwed him essentially. He then became a pro wrestler. Al Snow trained him. He learnt there. I can't remember the school name, but and he became NWA champion, NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and he held the title for over 4 years. And granted, it was at a time when NWA meant far less than it had previously. It was WCW was around. WWE.
Don't know if Dennis Cormier would agree with you on that one.
I'm sure he wouldn't. And the name still had some value. But as a promotion, it wasn't controlling wrestling. It wasn't like it was in the 60s or the 70s. And Dan was the NWA champion when he went to UFC. And when he won the UFC super fight title, he held both belts up at the same time. He had Al Snow in his corner. And he had the NWA world title, the super fight title. And can you imagine that today? Can you imagine the Brock Lesnar as WWE champion winning the UFC heavyweight title and holding them both up?
I mean, we'll get to. I don't think
can't even picture it.
I don't think it's an impossible dream.
It's not impossible now, but at the time. But then he came into WWE, and WWE didn't let him put the NWA belt on TV for whatever reason.
Because Dan Severn's kind of become this cult figure in a way, like because I know that the Attitude Era podcast had done kind of meme like videos on him where he would walk to the ring like he was about to murder somebody. But yeah, I mean, he's an interesting guy. Obviously, we have this book here as well.
Yeah, his autobiography.
We thought we'd just bring in.
Yeah, it's what I didn't write the book. Dan did with Ian Douglas, who is his ghostwriter, and I edited the book together and helped them out putting it out here. And I had to read through it, obviously, to do that. And going in, I thought, some of this might be interesting, especially like the wrestling part. The amateur wrestling stuff, I have no interest in amateur wrestling at all. MMA, I enjoy, but I don't particularly like reading about it. But that book kept me gripped. It was the way it's told, and Dan's own story is really fascinating. I learned a lot about him, as a man and a performer. And I would highly recommend it for anybody who's even the slightest bit interested in how... And the politics of all those other scenes as well as wrestling. Yeah,
and obviously, because Ken Shamrock's not written a book about his experiences yet.
No.
So this is kind of the going from being amateur wrestler, MMA, professional
wrestler, MMA.
Yeah, doing all of those kind of things, and then ending up in the WWF and finding that it's a different ball game for what they're going to give you, expect of you, and all that sort of stuff. But
yeah, it's fascinating. It's comments on the brawl for all are worth it alone, I think.
UFC 200 Saturday night. Let's just go through the top 3 fights.
Okay.
We'll leave a certain one to the end. The women's bantamweight championship. Misha Tate's defending against Amanda Nunes, I think her name is, or Nunes.
Yeah. I mean, I love Misha Tate. I mean,
it feels
I'm
like
a big fan of.
As an outsider, it feels like, because here's what's weird for me. So Ronda Rousey smashes Misha Tate a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Then Ronda Rousey goes against Holly Holm.
I wouldn't say she smashed her the most recent time. Like, I can't remember the number. Was it 112 or something like that? But the big fight they had in the same show as Anderson and Weidman, I wouldn't say she smashed her. Misha took Ronda further than anyone had ever taken her at that point.
Yeah, but in the end, she, Ronda didn't look super uncomfortable. She still looked like she was in control, but she was taking a little bit further.
She was. But Misha held her own for a little bit.
But what's weird is, so Ronda beats Misha twice, and then Ronda gets beat by Holly, and then Misha beats Holly. It's this weird, because I remember going into the Misha Tate Holly Holm fight, I was like, well, Holly Holm's going to win this. Like, it's not a question. But what I think is interesting is, this is going to be a pretty. I don't know much about Amanda Nunes, but I'm open to seeing what happens. But
that division is now unpredictable. Misha. No one expected Misha to go on the run she went on after the Ronda defeat, and to become. No one really thought she'd be a contender again.
Yeah,
because Ronda had beaten her twice so decisively, as you say. I mean, she was certainly comfortable. Don't get me wrong. I don't think she smashed her, but it was decisive. I agree with that. But Ronda then was on this streak where she was destroying people in seconds, literally. I think 3 of her fights combined were under a minute. She was destroying everybody. But then she came into the Holly fight, and there was 2 things that people who do pay closer attention than we do anyway. 2 things that people notice going into that. The first one is that Ronda had a lot of problems in her training camp and with a trainer and with her mum throwing her weight in and her opinion in about things that probably not ideal in the weeks leading up to a fight. So her preparation wasn't brilliant. All this movie stuff that she's been doing isn't great preparation for a fight either.
Don't take your eye off the ball.
Don't take your eye off the ball. And I think Ronda got a little bit too, not arrogant, but confident that, she couldn't be beaten. But she was going against Holly, who's an incredible puncher, with a boxing background. And Ronda, one thing that, and even I noticed this, and I'm not the most attuned to these things when I watch MMA, but if even I noticed it, then obviously Holly and her team noticed it, is that Ronda just walked through punches. Yeah. She thought she couldn't be knocked down or knocked out or anything. She just walked through punches and just like they weren't there and go into what she wanted to do and try and throw the judo in and throw whatever. And against Holly Holm, if she did that, people knew that she was going to get knocked out. And I put a bet on Holly winning. I know a lot of other people put bets on Holly winning when the odds were great because there was every chance that Ronda would try that tactic and she'd get flawed, and which is what happened. So,
well, also when you've got somebody like Ronda who, like you say, has got 7 or 8 things on her plate. She's got movies, she's got commitments, she's got an overbearing mother, she's got all these things going on, and then
her mother was a top level athlete as well. So.
Yeah, overbearing mother.
Maybe.
But then Holly, this is everything to her. She's going to be 100% focused on what she has to do.
Sure, I think she probably fought Misha too soon after the Ronda fight, and I think she probably took Misha for granted. And Misha, she's scrappy. That's the thing about her. She's scrappy. She's like the Shawn Michaels of women's MMA. She's resilient. She keeps coming back. She never gives up. Yeah. And that's kind of.
It's funny. So for me, as someone who, like I say, not an avid viewer, just kind of dips in and out. It feels like Misha Tate is keeping this championship for the Ronda fight. If that's what now Amanda Nunes could just completely knock that out of the water.
Could be.
She could. But
that's what they want. Yeah,
but I think one of the most interesting fights will be Misha Tate and Ronda Rousey again, because then you've got Ronda Rousey coming back. She has to win. Mm-hmm. If she doesn't, I don't know how much of a draw she becomes if she loses again. But then Misha Tate's also got to prove she beat me twice and then I won the title.
Some of the best UFC programs have been built around feuds like this, where it's one person will win or one person will need to win and the other person just can't beat them or can beat everybody else. And
it's one of the good things about MMA compared to wrestling is that in wrestling, if you watch WWE or you watch TNA or Ring of Honor, wherever you watch, who could win a title and who couldn't. 100%.
Yeah. They'll book themselves how they want to book it.
Dolph Ziggler's never going to pin the World Heavyweight Champion.
Not in a title.
To win the title.
Sure.
But in MMA, that could happen because you never know.
And sometimes it's good when it does, although recently when all their top stars are getting beat, it's not brilliant, because Conor got beat, Ronda got beat, and Bisping obviously won the title as well. So you got these 3 big shocks within the space of a couple of months of each other, and it's you start killing your draws. But that's just the nature of it.
I'm going to go predictions-wise. I'm going to go with what I think is the more likely option. I think Misha Tate retains. What's your prediction?
Really hope Misha retains. I think she is the favourite, but I wouldn't discount Nunes.
So who are you going for? Pick one.
I think probably Misha, but I wouldn't put money on it.
That, ladies and gents, is what we call a cop-out answer.
It is. Okay.
That's what we call it.
Sorry. I'm sitting on the fence.
Yeah, all right, Switzerland.
I know.
Then we've got the light heavyweight title match, which, to the UFC audience is the main event. to us, we're going to talk about another match in a minute, which is our kind of main event.
And in reality,
for
it
wrestling.
isn't the main event.
Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones, a lot of history in this match. Jon Jones won before. He then got the suspension.
He then got busted.
Was it performance enhancing and all this stuff? There's always kind of
whatever it was. I don't know the deals.
So
elevated levels.
Daniel Cormier's argument, because Daniel Cormier would then go on to win the title when it was vacant. Daniel Cormier says that he was never really beaten because Jon Jones had help,
which is a fair comment. You know?
And then Jon Jones says, "You're just holding my title for me till I come back and win it." This is great. I mean, Jon Jones is like, what I love about Jon Jones is he's playing the wrestling. He's playing like almost like the Kurt Angle of 1999, where he's playing a babyface, but he's such a heel.
Oh, he's a heel.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
he's Piper,
but he's not playing it as, he's not saying I'm a heel.
Oh no,
he's saying I'm one of you.
Well, I'm
the good guy. Yeah. So he's
real life's a bit more complex than good guys versus bad guys, I guess.
But like, even in UFC, most of the time there's a babyface.
Yeah, there is. Of course there is.
But this is the one that I think is the most, out of the 3 main events, I think this is the toughest one to call, because I feel like Cormier's got something.
If Jones is clean, maybe it's not that tough to call. And he's got to be clean now.
He has, surely
has to be. No, he has to be. You know, it's the new regulations mean he cannot get away with it, and he'll have been tested. I know Brock's been tested a bunch of times immediately.
I mean, I would want to test Brock, to be fair.
I wouldn't personally want to test Brock.
No, I'd send you in to do it.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's a tough one to call. I mean, the first fight they had, the build-up was incredible. Better than any wrestling build you've seen in the last decade. You know, it was phenomenal. The interest levels in that fight were huge, and it was such a big deal. You genuinely didn't know who was going to win, what was going to happen, and it was great. And that's what you want, because if you just know Roman Reigns is going to win, if it's wrestling, who really cares? You know, but if it's that unpredictable element of really not knowing who's going to win.
Look at last summer. SummerSlam main event, Brock and Taker. Nobody knew.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
everybody was hooked because you were like, I can't imagine the outcome.
Well, Brock and Reigns at WrestleMania, because you were like, well, if Brock wins, then that's Roman dead. But if Reigns wins, that's Roman dead even more. In a different way.
I mean, that may be the smartest finish they've ever booked.
Absolutely, yeah. Part of the cost, but you know.
Yeah. But so I'm going to go.
I think Cormier is great. I think Jones is a hell of a personality.
I love Cormier, but I think Jones is going to get it.
I think Cormier is gonna take it, and I think they'll do another match.
Oh yeah, of course they have to.
There's money in this being a series for UFC, so I would imagine they're hoping for that as well.
Okay, so the other main event, a heavyweight match, Mark Hunt, who could audition as a Samoa Joe lookalike if he felt the need, against Brock Lesnar, returning to the Octagon after the better part of 6 years. I'm just going to say it. I have this really bad feeling that Brock Lesnar's getting beat by Mark Hunt.
In under a minute. He's going to get destroyed.
And I am I think the minority, actually, I think that this really hurts is WWE.
Of course it hurts him. They bill him as this larger-than-life beast who's...
Nobody's beat him
Nobody
since the
can beat him. And it's like...
And he gets beaten in UFC. Yeah. Like, if I'm Vince McMahon and I know nothing about MMA...
Right.
And then you come to me and say, right, okay, Brock's going to fight this guy, Mark Hunt. Okay, what do I know about him?
He's 42-year-old.
He's 42-year-old guy, 12-10. That's his win-loss ratio.
Yeah.
Looks about like Samoa Joe.
Yeah, not in great shape,
Yeah, Vince will be like, God damn.
Well, Brock will beat him because Brock's a wrestler. Yeah.
Brock will be fine.
They've played Vince for a fiddle.
And now, Brock is f***ed.
Yeah. Oh, he is.
Like, really, really bad. Now,
I hope he wins.
I'd love to see him win.
I really hope he
Trust
wins.
me, I don't want to be sitting to this time next week on a stage with Paul Heyman saying, so what now?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
just to be clear, Kenny will be bringing Paul Heyman over for an Inside the Ropes tour, which you can give the details of now, Kenny.
InsideTheRopes.co.uk for tickets. Limited tickets left. This is going to be something special, so please do come along. But yeah, it's good. It's going to be interesting but luckily for Brock, the one thing I will say is, if Brock loses and he gets smashed and he comes back to WWE with the tail between his legs, the one thing that Brock Lesnar has that can hopefully get some of the sizzle back on him is Paul Heyman.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul can get anyone over. He can get anyone over.
You preach to the choir.
Yeah, I know. but everybody knows that, that Paul is the man to turn things around and save a character. It didn't quite work for Cesaro, but
so we both think that Mark Hunt is going to beat Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam.
I think it'll be first round. I think it'll be knockout.
And then I think that after that, Triple H will sign Mark Hunt to a 1-match deal at SummerSlam where Triple H beats him. And
I mean, on that note, though, like, who do you think? There's got to be something for WWE. I know they've distanced themselves completely from this fight.
So they've now announced that they have a SummerSlam point for Brock Lesnar.
I mean, we're recording this on the Wednesday. They're announcing this on the Thursday. Whether we'll be out in time, folks,
who knows? We may look stupid.
We may look stupid.
Probably will.
Stupider anyway. But
so the rumor is Randy Orton. Right now.
I think it probably will be Randy Orton. Awful. Talk about boring programs. I was kind of hoping Randy Orton had just secretly retired.
Yeah, nobody's missed him.
Nobody's missed him. Of course they haven't, because he's one of the most boring wrestlers on the planet. I know. Sorry, Internet. I know people love Randy Orton out there for some reason, and God forbid you criticize a WWE institution, but he's
a good wrestler.
He's a good wrestler. He's not a great wrestler.
But there's a reason that he's been around.
Name me a great Randy Orton match that isn't with Mick Foley. Just Randy Orton. Great. Not good. Not very good. Great. One match. A match. Randy Orton versus...
The only argument I have,
and
I don't... it's not even...
There's no match.
I was going to say one of the Christian matches, but... No.
Great?
No, not great. Because I couldn't even think of what one I would put as great, so...
Any other wrestler you can think of a great match they've been in. The top guys.
Yeah. No, it's true. I get it. But I think the thing with Lesnar is WWE's policy here is clearly sort of, we're going to announce an opponent for Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam because it doesn't matter that he's fighting the UFC.
Yeah.
But the problem you have there is if it's against Randy Orton, which is a mid-card match, and then he wins, you're just putting
biggest star.
You're putting your biggest star in the mid-card match.
Yeah.
But then if
the hedge and the bets, I guess.
Yeah, but then if you advertise him in the title match and he loses,
they can't win. They can't. It's a tough one. I mean, the obvious one is announce it on Raw. Maybe not 2-3 days before the fight. Maybe announce it after the fight, and then you can make plans. But either they just don't care about the result, or they're just almost ignoring it's happening and think, well, our audience won't see. They will.
I can't imagine he's fighting anyone else except Orton or in the title match. One of those two.
Who else could it be? Who else could it be, really? I mean,
my dream is Nakamura Lesnar, but he's not up in the main roster yet. So
I mean, Nakamura would be the smartest thing possible because, or Finn or Owens, because it doesn't really matter what the fight result is then.
Yeah.
Against those guys who need that elevation by working with him.
Mm-hmm.
Randy Orton's technically booked about the same level as a top guy, and a guy who's held the title and such. So it's a bit different.
Well, I guess it's difficult. I mean, we're going to have to wrap this up now because we have gone long here on the WhatCulture podcast.
Down to 3 viewers now.
3 viewers now? All 3 of you stuck around?
We won't do it again. We're sorry.
No, we're fine. It's MMA. We were contracted to this. I had to get a train. It's not pretty. Cross country, they're rubbish. Really rubbish. So, yeah, I mean, UFC 200, I think it's going to be an interesting night. I am intrigued and terrified about the Brock Lesnar-Mark Hunt match.
Yep.
Or fight.
It's going to be interesting.
Dan Severn book here. It's our plug for the episode.
Available on all Amazon stores and ebook available via shop.whatculture.com.
The realest guy in the room. He had the catchphrase before anyone else.
He was the beast first, and he had an advocate first. Mr. Jim Cornette, shout out to you.
There you go. Big JC, repping.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for listening and watching.
Don't say repping again.
You cannot find him on social media.
No, you can't.
You can find me on Twitter at KennyMC1985. If you want to do the F Kenny thing, go ahead, but it's just old hat now. You're just kind of regurgitating somebody else's stuff. Think of something new. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And let us know what you think about our predictions. Who do you want to win the big fights UFC 200? Comment below. We're not going to read them, but comment. Go for it. And we'll see you soon. It's a name. UFC culture. UF culture. Off culture.
Culture.
Culture. That's good.
Have you ever wanted to learn everything about the man with the greatest moustache in the history of combat sports? I'm talking, of course, about Dan the Beast 7. He's one of the most recognized fighters in MMA history, holding UFC gold and NWA gold at the same time. And in this book, Realest Guy in the Room, we swear it's not about Enzo Amore, he unloads on all of it. His humble beginnings, his rise to the top of MMA, his whole thing with Ken Shamrock, his time in WWF. So if you're young and have never heard of him, you owe it to yourself to pick this book up and learn a lot about a man who is very, 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 very good at hitting people. You can pick it up at shop.whatculture.com. Follow the link in the description.